Remember, it's not about the number of projects that you finish, it's the quality that counts. Hi, my name is Sarah, and welcome to my channel, which is all about sewing and styling a handmade wardrobe. In today's video, we're going to be ranking my March makes from my least favorite to my most favorite, and I'm also going to share a few repairs and alterations that I made. But before we get to that, I do want to address something that came up a lot in my last video where I shared my week of handmade outfits and talked about how my sewing machine broke. Now, if you're not interested in this topic, I will be putting chapters on this video, so you can skip straight to the makes if that's what you want to do. But I wanted to bring this up because it was a comment that just kept repeating over and over again in that video, that people just kept telling me that I should get a backup machine since my machine is currently being repaired. Now, there's a few reasons why I don't want to do this. But first, I feel like I should back up and give you a little bit of context. Now, getting a backup machine or getting a second sewing machine has been on my mind for a few years now. I've kind of gone back and forth on it. For projects like jeans, I was actually making the Jude jeans when my machine broke, having to go back and forth between the top stitching thread and the regular thread, and I'm also switching out the needles, it is a little bit cumbersome. And so the thought has crossed my mind throughout the years that, hey, maybe I should just get a second machine so that I could easily go back and forth between the two. It'd be a lot more convenient. And then for those times when my main sewing machine is being repaired, I would have another machine to use and I could just keep going and not have to stop and take a break. However, at this stage of my life, I've decided not to do that. And one of the primary reasons I decided against it was that I don't really have the space. I have a Gnome Horizon 7700 and I have the table that the machine fits into perfectly. And that table has enough space that I can put my serger right next to it, so I have the two right next to each other. But I don't really have adequate space to set up another machine. In fact, whenever I'm sewing knits and I need to use both my serger and my cover stitch machine, I have to actually put one of them on the floor and I just go back and forth between machines, just like picking up the one that I need off the floor and putting it on the table and then putting the one I'm not using on the floor. So that's already not an ideal scenario. And in order to make more space for another permanent machine, I would need to really reconfigure my sewing space, which is just a whole can of worms that I'm not prepared to do right now. Another reason why I just really don't want to buy another sewing machine at this point is that it just feels excessive. It feels like a luxury in the literal sense, which is something that would be nice to have, but it's not something that I really need. Now, I'm not judging anybody else. If you have one machine, two machines, 7 machines, like that is up to you, and I fully support you if you are happy. But just for me personally, having 2 sewing machines, a serger, and a cover stitch just feels like a lot for this one hobby. And the reason why I feel that way is I already basically feel like I have an excess machine in my cover stitch. Now, I bought my cover stitch machine quite a few years now. It might have even been like 5 or more years now. And I just don't use it that much. It is nice to have when I'm finishing my hems and it looks really professional when it works, but that's a whole other story. By the way, while I am getting my main machine fixed, I also brought in my cover stitch machine to get it serviced in the hopes that it'll work better. But again, that's another story. But the point is, I just don't even use my cover stitch machine much at all. And it wasn't hugely expensive. I can't even remember right now, but I think I paid around the neighborhood of $500 to $600 for the cover stitch machine. So not hugely expensive, but also not cheap. And to use it so little, it already feels like it was kind of a waste. And if I were to go back in time and tell myself when I was looking into buying the machine, I might just say like, you don't really need it. You could do the twin needle, you could do Maraflex thread. Although to be fair, Maraflex thread had not been invented at that point, or at least it wasn't on the market. Knowing what I know now, I think I have successful alternatives that I could use that I don't really need a cover stitch machine. Now that I have it, I'm gonna use it. I don't plan on selling it. It is a nice feature to have, but it just feels like something that I spent money on that I didn't necessarily really need. And I think getting a backup machine would pretty much end up being the same thing. Yes, it would be nice to have a second machine when I'm doing something like jeans and having to switch back and forth, like I said in the beginning, but also, like, I get along fine not doing that. Maybe it takes a little bit longer, but I'm not in a hurry anyway. And for the number of times that I don't have my primary machine, I just don't think that having a backup for those cases really justifies it, because that happens very rarely, like maybe once every other year. And really more than that, because I'm not very good at taking in my machines to be serviced regularly. I don't do it as much as I should. But the point is, not having a sewing machine for 2 weeks, which is what the repair guy told me that it would take, is not that long of a time frame in the grand scheme of things, and I'm gonna be just fine. Now, when I restarted my garment sewing journey back in 2019, at that point, I was kind of way more compelled to sew, and I really was excited about it. And I think part of it was like learning new skills, and also because a lot of the clothes in my closet didn't necessarily fit me or they weren't my style, and so I really needed new clothes. Maybe if that had happened back then, I would be more inclined to get another machine because I just felt like I needed to sew every day. But right now, I'm in this place where I'm a little bit more relaxed. I have a closet chock full of clothes, and I wear almost all of them, and I really like almost all of them. And the truth is, I don't need anything. I still make clothing because I enjoy the process and I like wearing things that I've made. And I get a lot of satisfaction and pride wearing the things that I know were custom made just for me, and they're really my style and they're really my taste and they fit me really well. But there's basically no scenario that's gonna pop up where if I don't have a machine for a couple weeks, I'm screwed. So I guess what I'm saying is, as I've gotten older, I think I've just learned to appreciate the long view a little bit better, that 2 weeks is really not that long to not have a machine, and I'm gonna make it through it. Now, I may end up in the future deciding that I do want to get a backup machine. I kind of see myself maybe in my retirement years when we move and we're in our forever home and I have my permanent space that I'm going to live in for the rest of my life, and I can set it up exactly the way that I want. At that point, I might decide that it'd be nice to have another machine. But for where I am in my life right now, I just don't find it a necessity. So that's why I've decided not to buy another machine. I know it might not even be that much of an expense depending on what I get. It's not even really about the expense, it's just that I feel like I don't really need it. I also had this thought, which to be honest, I haven't put it into practice yet, but the thought did occur to me that I do already have my spring plans all mapped out. So if I get desperate and I just have the creative juices flowing and I really feel like I want to do something with sewing, I could prep the patterns and cut out my next few projects so that they're all ready to go when I get my sewing machine back. Now that is not normally the way that I work. I normally like to do a project completely from start to finish and then move on to the next one. But like I said, if I just feel like I really need to do something, then there is always that. And that could totally keep me busy until I get my machine back. It should only be another week at this point. So I think I've said enough about that, and now we can move on to the refashions and repairs that I did for the month of March. So there were 3 projects that I worked on in the month of March, and I don't have them here, but I'll put in pictures. One of them was so incredibly simple. The button was coming off of my Paradise Patterns Protea pants. So I just sewed it back on. It took about a minute and then it was done. And the only reason I mention this, because it's such a silly small thing, why do I even bring it up? I bring it up because those pants had been sitting in my timeout basket for like 2 months. And that was 2 months of me not being able to wear them because I was too lazy to sew on a button. So just in case you're like me and you need that little extra kick to get you going, let me remind you that it only takes a minute to resew on a button, so just do it and it'll be done and you can wear that piece again and love it. And I've already worn those pants since I fixed them again and I really enjoy wearing them. They're a year-round staple for me. The other 2 were more alterations. They were a little bit more involved. The next one I want to talk about is my Deer and Doe Myosotis dress. I'm pretty sure I made this back in 2021, and at the time that I made it, I really liked it and I wore it quite a few times that year, but in 2022 and 2023, I really barely wore it at all. And if you ask me on paper, like, Sarah, do you like your Myosotis dress? I would say, oh yeah, I love that dress, it's great. But the truth is that I just wasn't wearing it. So it took me a really long time of contemplating and figuring out what is it about this dress that makes me not want to put it on. And I decided in the end that it was the sleeves. I just am not a big bell sleeve person. I don't even know why I did that view, to be honest. I just feel like they get in the way, and I don't like 3/4 sleeves because it's really hard to put a layer on over them. And because it's a wider sleeve, it tends to get kind of like stuffed in your jacket or your cardigan and it's uncomfortable. So I decided to just take that bell sleeve off and make it a short sleeve. And then it's strictly just a spring and summer dress. It's not really a fall and winter dress anymore. And I think it would just be a lot more wearable that way. So that's what I did. Another like really relatively simple sort of fix. I just took the bell sleeve off and then I did a 1-inch hem on the short sleeve. And I have to say, I'm so glad that I did it. I think that it is much better now. I did also wear this dress the other day and I wore a cardigan over it. There were no sleeves getting stuffed up in there and it was super uncomfortable. It was very easy to layer. And I definitely think that this dress is gonna be back in the rotation and it's gonna get a lot more use this spring and summer. I'm hoping that it will anyway. So I think that one was a huge success, and I'm really excited to wear it more as the weather warms up. The last alteration that I made was my Closet Core Cali Shacket. I made this in the fall, and it was another piece that, although I liked it on paper, I wasn't really wearing it, but this time it was very easy for me to know why I wasn't wearing it, because I actually didn't like it at the time when I finished it, but was kind of too lazy to do anything about it and was like, well, maybe it won't be that bad, but it was that bad because it made me not want to wear it, and that was the uneven hem. The way that the Cali tunic view is drafted, it has kind of a normal looking front, but then the back dips down really low. It's a very, very severe high-low hem, and I just hated it. I really, really hate that. And I was kind of telling myself that it's in the back and no one even sees it and who cares. And I just knew that the back of the shacket was really long and cut off my legs and made it look really bad, and I just hated it. So this one was another fairly easy fix. I went ahead and unpicked the binding because there's a bias binding that finishes off the hem. I unpicked that binding from the back, like past the side seam, and then I used the front piece as sort of a guide to figure out like how the curve should go. And then I ended up cutting off roughly 4 inches off of the center back, so quite a bit of length off of the back. So now the back of the shacket is just ever so slightly longer than the front and has a very similar shape. And then I ended up just sewing the binding back on and of course shortening it because it didn't need to be as long anymore. I shortened it the same way that you would if you were doing a quilt binding. Really simple fix, relatively quick, and I just think that it looks so much better now. So even though I would class this as more of a fall jacket, I'm not necessarily going to be wearing it a ton in the spring or the summer, but I will be happy that it's ready for next fall. And I just feel like I'm going to reach for it so much more now. Just another lesson that I really need to remember, that if I'm getting that nagging feeling right after I finish a piece that I really don't like this, I'm probably not going to wear it. So I really should just sit down and take the time and fix it right then rather than leaving it for later. So that's just something for me to keep in mind moving forward. Now, as usual, I'm going to throw you to the makes which were filmed at different times throughout the month. So I won't be discussing the rankings too much during those segments, but I will be putting up title cards so you know how we're counting down. And there's not too many projects this time, but they're all good ones. The next project I'd like to talk about is my Monkey Socks by Cookie A. This used to be a very popular pattern in the knitting community. I don't know if it is anymore. I myself have made this pattern multiple times. I can't remember exactly how many times I've knit it, but at least twice before I made this one. This is a free pattern on the knitty.com website, but it's also in a book that I happen to have, and the book version has different sizes. So I made the smallest size and I used size 1 or 2.25 millimeter needles. Normally I knit all of my socks on size 0s, but I have to size up for this pattern because it doesn't have a ton of stretch. And I couldn't just size up to the larger size because there's quite a big difference between the two sizes that are available, and the larger size would have been too big and the smaller size would have been too tight. So I just went ahead and sized up one needle size in order to get them to fit me. The yarn that I used for these is Knit Pick Stroll. It's been in my stash for a really long time. I actually made a sweater out of this yarn, which I no longer have because I didn't really like it. The issue that I have with this particular yarn base is even though it's a 75-25 merino nylon yarn, just kind of like your standard sock yarn, there's just something about the feel of it. It just feels a little bit plasticky to me, and I don't really like the yarn, especially as a sweater. I didn't like wearing the sweater against my skin because it felt a little bit clammy and just not that comfortable. But these days I'm trying really, really hard to just use up yarn that's in my stash because I have so much of it and I don't really want to buy yarn unless there's just something for a particular project that I don't happen to have already. So I went ahead and used this yarn for these socks because it was in my stash and it was a bright color, which is what I had wanted. These socks did take me a little over a month to knit, but it wasn't actual knitting time. It probably takes me about a week to knit a pair of socks. But I did knit the entire first sock, and then I think I got a little mini case of second sock syndrome, and I just didn't feel like casting on the second one. So I put it away for several weeks until I finally decided to go ahead and finish the project, so that's why it took so long. It's hard for me to put a price tag on this project because the yarn's been in my stash for such a long time, but I would guess that with the pattern from the book and then the yarn, it was probably less than $10. Now I am very, very happy with how these socks turned out, and I'm sure that I will enjoy wearing them. But I was also happy to get these off the needles and to be able to start something else because I don't know, I just got a little bit bored with it at the end. The next project that I would like to share is the Maison Fauve Pompon Vest. This is a free pattern and I made it as part of my spring plans, and also I did finish it in time to enter the So Frugal challenge. This project took me 8 days from start to finish, and the project cost was $5 because the linen fabric was reclaimed from a skirt that I had made many years ago, and so I consider that to be free. And the lining fabric is a leftover piece from another project. It's a viscose poly lining, so I also consider that to be free. And so the only cost of this vest is the buttons and the interfacing and, wear and tear on my equipment. So overall, I just decided to estimate the project cost as $5. Now for sizing, I made the size 34 up at the shoulders and the chest, and then I graded to a size 36 at the waist. This was a really interesting project to make, partly because I was trying to use this reclaimed fabric, and also just the pattern itself was interesting and had some really good details. So I did end up using pretty much the entirety of the skirt fabric that I had. I even had to unpick the pocket bags, and I used those pieces to cut out some of the little faux welt pocket pieces. So I was really proud of myself that I really had very little fabric waste. And so I just felt like that really fit well into the spirit of So Frugal, and I'm happy that I managed to do that. Now I did not make any pattern alterations besides grading from the smaller size to the bigger size at the waist. I considered this to be a wearable muslin that I could tweak the sizing as I went along because I do think that I will make future versions of this. Now that it's finished, I do have a few issues with the fit. I think that it's a little bit big up top. Now, oddly enough, it didn't seem that big when I tried it on right after finishing it, but this has since been washed, air dried, and ironed, and I don't know if my fabric might have relaxed a little bit, but it just seems like it's a little bit bigger now than it was when I initially finished it, and I'm not quite sure why. I definitely think the next time that I make the pattern, I will raise the armholes a little bit because it's fine to wear this as a vest over another shirt, but if I try to wear it without a shirt underneath, I think the armhole's a little bit low and it's a little bit baggy. And now I do have a question for you about fitting with darts. So I needed the size 34 for my chest, but this pattern actually has waist darts, which I do know is part of the bust shaping. But when I was cutting out my pattern, I went ahead and used the size 36 waist darts because down at the bottom, I need the 36. But I'm not quite sure if maybe that might have affected the bust shaping and made it bigger than it should have been because I needed the 34. So what do you do when you have a waist dart and you need the bigger size of the waist, but you need the smaller size of the chest? Does anybody know how you reconcile those two things? Really, I probably should have just done a small bust adjustment and then it kind of wouldn't have mattered, but I'm just curious if anybody has any feedback. So yes, next time I would do a small bust adjustment, I would raise the armholes, and I would also move the darts. I think that the waist darts end up being a little bit too high, so I would end the point of the darts an inch lower. I also had a problem after I washed it, and I'll put in some pictures so you can see what I'm talking about. But when you make the darts on the lining, well, actually on the whole thing, when you make the darts, you sew the darts, and then you're supposed to cut them open to the tip and press them open, and I did do that. The problem was that after I washed it, the lining actually frayed to the point where it came apart, because when you get to the very tip of the dart, there's not very much seam allowance on either side. And so when I make this again, I won't cut the darts open. I'll just leave them as is and press them to the side. I did want to point that out because I do think that that could be an issue for a lot of people. If your fabric easily frays, then I just wouldn't cut those darts. So once I had noticed that the lining had frayed and come apart, I just did a really probably not very good job of taking a little bit more seam allowance and just hand stitching it up, and I hope that it holds. It doesn't look perfect on the inside anymore, but because it's inside the garment, it doesn't really bother me. Other than that, I have to say that it was a really enjoyable project. The instructions were really, really good and very clear. And there's a few tricky parts like doing the faux welt pockets and, putting in the little tab thing in the back. It's not hard, but it's a little bit more complex than just sewing a t-shirt. But the process was just really enjoyable. And I took my time, and I really do like the style of this. I think I mentioned it in my spring plans video that I haven't had a tailored vest like this in a long, long time. And so I wasn't really sure if it was going to fit well into my wardrobe, but I actually really like it. And I do think that there's a place for this one in my wardrobe and also maybe a few others, maybe some in a fun color, maybe something like a fun matching set, like a vest and a pair of shorts. I really did like this project a lot, and I debated between this one and another project that you're about to see about which one was my favorite. But in the end, I think because of some of the fit issues that I had, and then of course the fraying on the inside, that ultimately I decided that this one was a really, really good project, but not my favorite of the month. The dress that I'm currently wearing is the Sew Over It kitty dress. This project cost me about $18 because it was a Minerva brand ambassador project, so I received the fabric for free. So that cost includes the pattern and also a $5 cushion for notions. And this dress took me 14 days to sew. It was a little bit more of an extensive project, and I'll get into why in a second, but there were quite a few days there where I didn't sew because I was just really busy in the past couple of weeks. So for this dress, I made the size 8 in the bodice, and then I graded to a size 10 at the waist, and then I just kept the size 10 for the skirt because it's very loose and free-flowing and the hip size doesn't matter. I did do a 1-inch small bust adjustment and also a broad back adjustment, and I also lengthened the skirt by 4 inches to make it ankle length. The intention of the original skirt was to be about knee length. There are several different views with this pattern, which is one of the things that drew me to it. For my version, I did the short sleeves with the notched collar, and then I did the gathered skirt. So let's talk about fabric first. The outer cherry print is 100% cotton poplin, and when I received it in the mail, it was just a little bit more sheer than I was comfortable with wearing on its own. But fortunately, I had also ordered some 100% cotton lawn from Minerva in a white color that I was originally intending to make a blouse out of, but I decided to use it instead to just line the dress because it was a perfect match. And I'm so happy that I did that because I think that you can't see through the dress at all. It looks really polished and nice. Now I did do kind of a strange combination of lining and interlining. I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. So I did keep the facings because this side of the collar shows, so this needs to be in the cherry print. And I know that there is a way that you could eliminate the back neck facing, but I just didn't want to give myself that mental headache. And my fabrics were not super thick, so I just cut out the back neck facing also. And then I sewed the bodice lining and the skirt lining pieces separately from the main pieces, but then when I put the whole thing together, when I attached the bodice to the waistband to the dress, I just treated it as one. And also when I installed the sleeves, because the sleeves are not lined. So that's how I kind of combined lining and interlining. And I'll put in some pictures of the inside of the dress so you can see how that came together. The lining is 1 inch shorter than the dress, just so it won't peek out from the bottom. And I think it all worked out actually pretty well. The instructions for this pattern were very clear and really good. It's one of the things that I like about Sew Over It patterns. I just feel like they have pretty good instructions. I never have trouble following them. This dress does come with pockets, which is a feature that is always welcome in a dress. I think the fit on this is pretty good. I like that I did the small bust adjustment because I do feel like the bodice fits me a lot better. The only thing is that the shoulder is a little bit long on me. Normally in Sew Over It patterns, I would make a size 6 in the shoulders, but this particular pattern only comes in sizes 8 to 20, I believe. So I started with the 8 and then I was too lazy to do a narrow shoulder adjustment. I probably really should have done that, but I didn't. So the shoulders do hang off a little bit, but I don't think it looks too bad. Also, just as a note, when you do a small bust adjustment, it does remove the width, not just from the chest, but also from the waist. And so the waist ended up being slightly smaller than the size 10, which was actually perfect for me because I was kind of in between the sizes 8 and 10 when looking at the finished garment measurements. So by taking out that little bit of extra width down at the waistline, it made it pretty much perfect. It's fairly fitted, but it's not too tight, it's not constricting, and I just think it looks really nice. So I was a tiny bit worried when making this dress that it was going to be a little bit too vintage costumey. I know that the cherry print kind of evokes the 50s and you've got your classic shirt dress, but the truth is I absolutely love the way that this turned out and I'm super excited to wear it. It's comfortable, it's lightweight. I think it's going to be really nice to wear in the spring and summer months, and I love a good white dress. It's not see-through. And although I have a lot of dresses in my wardrobe, so I always try to be a little bit careful about what I add, this one is different enough from all of the other dresses that I own that I do think that there's a space for it in my closet. And I think that it can be styled in a variety of ways, so I have a couple of different clips that I've been showing you about how I would wear it. I would definitely wear it more casually, even with sneakers or sandals in the summertime, but I think it could also be dressed up for work or going out on a date night. So I'm really incredibly pleased with how this dress turned out. I kind of have a feeling it's going to be a showstopper on Instagram. I've already gotten a lot of love and feedback on the Minerva website and my write-up over there. And although it did take a fair amount of time, I really enjoyed the process of sewing this. It was just very kind of soothing, nothing too challenging, but just something really enjoyable that I could sink my teeth into. So that's my sew over at Kitty Dress. Let me know in the comments if you love it as much as I do. So I hope that you enjoyed seeing what I made this month. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see what else I've been making in 2024, I'll put up the playlist right here.